Well, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm kind of curious, how many here tonight are railroaders or former railroaders? All right, quite a group. Good, good. I want to talk to you railroaders after the program, okay? Because I have lots of questions. I am from Rogers. We used to come through here in the 1960s. My mom and dad put me in the back of that 1960 Buick LeSabre, and we would drive the highway. I think it was 68 at that time, is that right? We'd drive all the way over to West Tennessee, where my mother's family was from. We would cross a ferry here at Norfolk, I guess, and then we would cross a ferry at Dyersburg, into Dyersburg, Tennessee, across the Mississippi. Those were the good old days. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is the White River Line. This is what you might recall as formerly the Missouri Pacific Railroad. And I just want to share with you, we came up with the title, Dave and I, of the White River Line Risk and Rewards. So we're going to kind of tell you the history of the line and talk about some of the rewards of the line and some of the risk associated with railroading. I owe a lot of credit to this guy right here. My late friend Walter Mike Adams actually wrote a book called The White River Railway, and it's a great history. His father was an official for the Missouri Pacific and worked on the White River Line, and then Mike later would work for the Missouri Pacific. So it was a family thing. He grew up in Cotter and Aurora, Missouri back in the 20s and 30s and tells all the stories of the day. So it's really, really a fascinating story. If you ever want to read more, you can find that book on eBay or Amazon probably and pick up a copy. He published that back in 1991. Now this is a map, 1921 Arkansas Official Railroad map. And by this time there were 3 railroads kind of crisscrossing diagonally through North Arkansas, Northeast Arkansas. Up at the top, the green line, you can see that is the Frisco Railroad, their line that would go from Springfield, Missouri to Memphis, ultimately to Birmingham. The line that's red right here and goes across, of course, is the White River Line. It's closest to Mountain Home. And then there's another line built, the orange line that you see there, the Missouri and North Arkansas, not to be confused with the modern Missouri and Northern Arkansas. The Missouri and North Arkansas Railroad went bankrupt in 1946 and largely abandoned in 1946. The Missouri and Northern Arkansas now operates the old Missouri Pacific White River Line, still very active to this day. So this line, I don't have the date when it was built, but this line, the White River Line, was completed in 1905, and the old Missouri and North Arkansas, the M and NA, which they affectionately called the May Never Arrive, was completed in 1909 from Joplin, Missouri to Helena on the Mississippi, Helena, Arkansas on the Mississippi. Now this is the line we're going to talk about tonight. This is just a map showing a couple of lines radiating out of Kansas City at the top of the map into Arkansas. And the White River Line would come down to Joplin, Carthage, and then come across North Arkansas to, ultimately it was a line from Kansas City to Memphis. It was the route of a passenger train, a named passenger train, for a time from 1931 to 1952 called the Southern Scenic. The other line that you see over on the left part of the screen is another route that went from Kansas City down through Kansas into Oklahoma and down into ultimately to Little Rock. The line that's being operated today is operated, as I said, by the Missouri and Northern Arkansas. This is their map, and it's the line in gold there that you can see. So just to give you a little context, this line is still very active, unlike the old Missouri and North Arkansas line. How did it begin? Well, the railroad that built the White River Line was called initially the St. Louis Iron Mountain and Southern. Just for short, they called it the Iron Mountain. And when they built this line, started building the line, actually they started building westward from Newport, a little town just north of Newport on the railroad called Diaz. And when they started building that line, at this time in history, the roads were almost non-existent. you would get around by either stagecoach or hacks, what they called hacks, or horseback, and sometimes roads were impassable in rainy weather. The creeks, if the creek doesn't rise, right? So it was a tough way to get around. The railroads were going to bring a solution to that. Now, a lot of the railroad building in this part of the United States really didn't get underway in earnest until after the Civil War. And so by 1870, 1880, 1890, there were a lot of railroads that were built around this part of Arkansas, but because of the topography, the rugged Ozark Hills, a lot of railroads didn't want to take it on. Well, this man comes along. His name is Jason Gould, or Jay Gould. He was one of those railroad robber barons that you may have read about in your history books. He acquired stock control of a railroad called the Missouri Pacific and became its president in 1879. He's generally identified as one of the robber barons of the Gilded Age. But his sharp and often unscrupulous business practices made him one of the wealthiest men of the late 19th century, and he became quite unpopular for some of his business practices. Nevertheless, by 1881, he purchased the Iron Mountain. In addition, he had the Missouri Pacific. Now he's purchased the Iron Mountain as part of his growing Southwest system, as they called it. And his desire was to unite the Iron Mountains line in eastern Arkansas at Newport with the Missouri Pacific's line that had come down to Carthage and Joplin to the west, thus providing a shorter route from Kansas City to the Mississippi River crossing at Memphis. Now, this is a 1929 map that the Missouri Pacific put out, and it just shows the line. If you look at the far right, you'll see, it's probably in the back seat back there, you probably can't see the letters, but right up here is Diaz, Arkansas, where the line split off. And this map actually is showing Diaz to Calico Rock. By 1887, Jay Gould had completed a preliminary survey from Batesville to Carthage. And there were competitors, such as the Fresco Railroad, that were also proposing lines in the area. But under the general state laws of the state of Arkansas, the White River Railway was incorporated on February 8, 1901. Now, as I said, this is a little late in the game because most railroads were already built by the 1870s, 1880s in the area. But this railroad comes along a little later. And construction of the line began at Diaz, just north of Newport, at milepost 259. Now, I'm going to be you're going to see at the bottom of my slides, a lot of times you'll see the letters MP. That stands for milepost. And the mileposts are gauged from St. Louis, which was the headquarters of the Missouri Pacific. And so when you see the miles, you'll understand why Diaz is at milepost 259. So this line that started to get built was called the White River Extension. And it was in service to Batesville by April of 1883. Even though the White River Railway as a whole was incorporated in 1901, there was still some mileage built from Diaz to Batesville. It was built to secondary branch line standards of the day with 56 pounds to the yard steel rail and river gravel or dirt for ballast. So from Newport to Batesville was 30 miles, and mixed train service at that time, this is 1883, took 3 hours for an average of 10 miles per hour. But when you think about the alternative, that was speed. That was speed. We're spoiled these days. This is Pinter's Bluff during the railroad construction. And you can see the crews lining along the river, the big bluffs. They would blast the bluffs to create a shelf for the railroad. And just showing you some construction pictures here. You might wonder how they laid the track way back then. There was a device that was patented called the Improved Harris Track Laying Machine. Now, this is not on the White River. I borrowed this photo from another location. It's probably out in California. But this is what the track laying machine looked like. And let me kind of describe it to you. It would consist of a locomotive with an entire train of flat cars to move ties and rails onto the roadbed in front of the train. They had rollers and carts, and they moved the rails along, mounted on the flat cars, advancing the material ahead of the train. And as the ties and the wood ties that the rails sit on were laid in front of the train would proceed forward. And this large track laying machine contraption had walkways on the sides of the flat cars to accommodate at times more than 100 men, with about 120 to 130 men in total, including those on the ground, placing the ties in place and spiking the rails. 2 to 3 miles of track could be laid in one day with such a machine. It was quite advanced. Later on, the more advanced ones would use steam power for some of the mechanisms. Here's a colorized postcard that was taken around 1907, showing Pinter's Bluff. That's 20 miles north and west of Batesville. And I want you to notice all the rock work along the river there. This is the infamous Soldier's Rock between Mount Olive and Boswell. Actually, it was at this place that held up construction of the line of the White River Railway, held up construction for 6 months. They had a lot of trouble right here getting things blasted just right to allow the track to be used. Then they get to Calico Rock. I want you to notice the curve. You see the White River there. You see a trestle kind of in the middle of the picture there. This is construction. This photo was taken in 1902. Construction of the railroad trestle. And some of the materials used came in from the riverboat. So you can actually see the riverboat down below and some of the materials being brought up to construct the trestle. And here they're laying a steel girder in place on the trestle at Calico Rock. Now, if you look closely to the left, these pictures are not high definition. These are really old pictures, and this is probably a copy of a copy of a copy. But if you look over to the left, far left, you'll see several men there on the rock. They're on top of Calico Rock, and this is one part of the construction crew that helped build the line through that area. Now on the ground, you have the maintenance crews. The maintenance crews back in these days had the old hand car. You've probably seen movies or videos of, they'd have to pump the car to make it move. But they had to do a lot of maintenance after they blasted away the shelf, laid the track. Still, rock slides would occur. Weather events would cause mudslides and various things. So these crews were very busy day and night maintaining the rails so the trains could pass through. Now we're talking about risk and rewards with the White River Line. Here's a risk. This is how the railroad was built. They would take dynamite and blast the bluffs and ridges. This photo was actually taken near Hollister, Missouri in 1905. And the laborers back then were paid a whopping $1.25 to $1.50 per day of work. And men that had teams of mules or horses were paid $2 to $3 per day. All the local people that wanted work in the area were hired on the spot. And the railroad was built mostly by pick and shovel, teams and slips. And the railroad through Marion County was built largely by Italians, a lot of immigrants building the line. They had camps along the line, one of which was located at Cotter and another one at Flippin. Now this map shows Guyan to Bergman, and track laying at Batesville began westward in January 1902. Yellville and Mountain Home, the newspaper accounts say they battled quite a bit to get the railroad to pass through their towns, each town offering a substantial amount of money to get the railroad to pass through. And there was a survey completed from the mouth of Big Creek up to Mountain Home, but it would have required the railroad to ascend 400 feet in elevation in just over 4 miles. For a standard gauge railroad, that's too steep. And so after a lengthy debate, the Missouri Pacific announced on November 21st, 1902, that the White River Line would meet the Missouri Pacific Line at a place called Lakes Landing, which is today's Cotter. And it was also known as Lakes Ferry as well. So they began construction on a sizable railroad yard there, a tunnel, and a railroad bridge, and Cotter's population all of a sudden swelled to at least 600, and it served early on by 43 businesses. Its first post office was in Cotter was established in 1903. First school opened in 1904 with 40 pupils. And the town was named Cotter in honor of the popular railroad manager, William Cotter. So the line reached Cotter where the railroad crossed the south side of the White River in 1903, and the bridge was built in 1904, completed in 1905. And the White River Railway was quickly becoming a significant southeast-northwest vector of development across northern Arkansas and Stone and Taney counties in Missouri. Cotter became a major railroad hub, and shops were built there as well. Now here's something that never happened, so when you see this photo, don't get too excited. This never happened. But I wanted to picture it so you could get an idea of what it would have looked like had it happened. In June 1903, the citizens of Mountain Home met to organize a railroad called the White River and Mountain Home Railway. It was a proposed electric traction line, so it would use like what we would call a trolley or something similar, an interurban car. And it was proposed to run from Mountain Home to Cotter Heights. Preliminary surveys were conducted, a subscription drive was initiated, but it never came to pass. In December 1905, the Mountain Home and White River Traction Company actually did receive a charter from the Secretary of State to build a line from Mountain Home to the mouth of the Big Creek near milepost 362 and about 20 miles below Cotter between Norfolk and Buffalo. And the citizens of Mountain Home pledged $150,000, it's 1903, to complete this endeavor. So Mountain Home came that close to having a railroad. It would have been an electric railroad. Electric railroads were springing up during this era, but it did not happen. This map shows flipping westward to Crane, Missouri through Bergman and Branson. The railroad was built to penetrate the mineral fields of Boone and Marion counties, as well as to harvest the vast forest of ash, hickory, oak, cedar, and pine. Here's a construction photo in Cotter from 1903, showing construction of the railroad bridge there. And in the early years of the construction, there were many accidents and, unfortunately, many fatalities due to rock slides, flooding, washouts, rock avalanches, construction accidents. In fact, in early August of 1903, there was an Irish laborer was killed in a cave-in in the partially completed tunnel across the river in Cotter. On December 11th, 1903, the Cotter Courier paper reported the death of a 35-year-old man named Lewis Collins. He was a bridge contractor who died while working on the Cotter Bridge, leaving behind a widow and 4 small children. And if you ever read newspaper accounts back in this era, they graphically, way too graphically describe how he died. So I did not include that in my presentation. Here's a postcard showing Cotter. There's the bridge across the White River. If you look just beyond the bridge, you'll see the tunnel. And if you go there in the fall or winter and have a good telephoto lens, you can get a photo like this. Looking down the line, this is looking what we would call Railroad North, I guess, and you're looking through the swing span bridge over the White River, and you can see the tunnel all the way through the tunnel. It's kind of a neat photo. Well, the early 1900s, this is the early 1900s view of a steam-powered passenger train crossing a very, very tall trestle somewhere in Stone County, Missouri. There was a gentleman named George Hall in that era who had a camera that he would set up and took lots of pictures, 1903, 1904, 1905, all the way from Hollister, Branson, all over. And I just want to show you this trestle. See how massive this trestle is. You're not even seeing the full thing. But one of the things the railroad did over the years is those trestles that could be filled in, they would build the trestle first. So the railroads trains have to run pretty level. You can't, a 1% grade is considered a little bit steep for railroads. And so they tried to keep a level going through all these hills and hollers and valleys, building these massive trestles, and then they would later bring in a bunch of rock and dirt and dump the rock and dirt over the trestle. And so now, sometimes along the White River line, you'll see these huge fills, but initially they were trestles that have been since filled in. This is Newark, Arkansas, around 1910, just showing you some of what commodities were shipped on the White River line. Bales of cotton. There was quite a bit of cotton shipped in those days. Cotton here being loaded into boxcars. And how about peaches? This is Hollister, Missouri, 1909. Loading peaches into refrigerated cars to go to market. But I also want you to notice, look at all the lumber. Fence posts, railroad ties, all kinds of lumber products were being harvested too. This is kind of funny. I love this postcard. Before there was Photoshop, there was this. We have the biggest peaches in the world. That's actually at Hollister in 1909. Peaches being loaded onto a Wells Fargo express car. But these were amazing days on the White River line. And you know, as I studied the White River line, I tried to imagine what it would have been like to have actually seen this. I feel like, oh, I was born too late. I wanted to see all this stuff. Well, fortunately for us, there's this man here. Let me go back to the right slide. Here we go. There's this man right here, John W. Barriger III. He was an American Railroad executive. His resume is unbelievable. But let me just share this part of it. For 8 years, from 1933 to 1941, he worked in federal service as the railroad chief of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. And he went all over the United States, sitting on the back of a passenger train, taking pictures of all the infrastructure. Around 1935 especially, he went all over the country. His papers and photos and railroad library of 10,000 volumes and 600 feet of documents are now included in the John W. Barriger III National Railroad Library at the University of Missouri at St. Louis. Over 27,000 of John Barriger's railroad photographs have been shared with the public on the internet. You can find it on Flickr. Just look up Barriger Library on Flickr and you can find his pictures. But in 1935, he boarded a train in Newport, Arkansas, train 232, the Southern Scenic, and he took a ride on the White River line. So he took a whole bunch of pictures. Unfortunately, he did not record the location. So I've had to guess, and this is one of the reasons why I want to talk to you railroaders after the program, because maybe you can help me identify where some of these pictures were taken on the line. But I'm going to show you the ones that I have identified. So here, the first one is Paraquet, Arkansas. This is the Black River Drawbridge between Newport and Batesville. So he's sitting on the back of this passenger train, just taking pictures. What a great job. What talking about a gravy job. You know, we talked earlier about somebody chasing tornadoes. That's weird, isn't it? You want to hear something weirder? I chase trains and take pictures of them. So anyway, here's Batesville. They're coming into the Batesville depot. By the way, that depot still stands in Batesville. This is train 232, the northbound Southern Scenic, and that's the platform. John Barriger sat on that car and took all these pictures you're about to see on that from that platform. So here we're trucking along or railroading along the old navigation lock number 2 between Earnhardt's and O'Neill at milepost 293. We're coming into Boswell, or we've just come through Boswell, Arkansas, milepost 333.9. And notice the water tank for the steam locomotives. Notice the cattle guards on the track, so as to keep the cows from crossing over. Lots of neat things in these photographs. Boswell, he's just gone through Boswell. You can see Boswell in the distance. Trestle on a curve somewhere, not sure where. Some say Calico Rock, but I don't see the steel girder, so I'm wondering if that is Calico Rock. Here's an example. He's going along, and he just passed by a crew of railroad maintenance workers working on the trestle, and this is probably one of those trestles that was filled in. okay? Because you can see all the earthwork on either side. And they're either replacing ties or working on the rail here. Here he's coming in, this is for sure Calico Rock, and this is the only place where Mr. Berger turned his camera around to shoot a photo of the train. And you can see the train consist, you can see the actual Calico Rock in the distance. And again, this is the Southern Scenic passenger train on the White River Line. This is at Norfolk. The North Fork River Bridge was built in 1909. It's a 3-span through truss bridge over the North Fork White River and Prospect Street on the railroad at Norfolk. One 6-panel Pratt through truss, one 9-panel Parker through truss, and one 6-panel Pratt through truss for you bridge enthusiasts in here. 631 feet long. There's a neat story about this bridge though. In July 1952, President Truman was aboard the Missouri Pacific on the White River Line to come dedicate the Bull Shoals and Norfolk dams. It is reported that his train stopped on this bridge, the Norfolk Bridge, for security reasons, while Harry and his cabinet members slept overnight in the business car on the bridge. Harry loved to travel by rail, and he really loved the Missouri Pacific because, as you recall, he's from the Grandview, Independence, Missouri area, and that was big Missouri Pacific country. The next morning, they took off and rode by auto to the Norfolk Dam and then onward to the Bull Shoals Dam for the dam dedication ceremonies. We're moving along now. We're at Buffalo, Arkansas, milepost 369 from St. Louis. Now we're coming in somewhere near Cotter. This is Bridge 148. Usually the railroads would number their bridges in line with their milepost. But early on, it appears in the White River, they had a system for numbering their bridges that were separate from the milepost. So this is not milepost 148, this is Bridge 148. Crossing Bridge 148 between Bergman and Myrtle. Bridge 146 over Bear Creek, just south of Myrtle. This span is 641 feet long and 76 feet high. Now, we finally come into Cotter. This is the Cotter Depot. Originally, it was a 2-story because it was not only the railroad depot, but it was the division offices for the White River Division. And he's just left the Cotter Depot heading north, and you can see the Cotter Yard off to the right there. Now, as he went through the yard, he swung his camera to the right a little bit and caught a glimpse of the Cotter Roundhouse. Cotter had a large roundhouse for the steam locomotives and a turntable where they could turn the locomotives around. And you'll also notice a repair shed on the left side of that photo. That's called a rip track, repair in place track. Notice that shed because we're going to see it a little later in the program. A couple of girls don't seem to mind a steam locomotive and passenger train passing by their shoulder as they're walking along the right-of-way. But we're leaving Cotter now, and to the right you see a platform. That's an ice platform where they could take big blocks of ice, is how they kept the refrigerator cars cool to get the produce to market. So they would put cars on that track and push these big old blocks of ice into the tops of the cars. They'd go down into the ends of the cars. This is a Cotter as well, crossing the White River Bridge and about to enter the Cotter Tunnel. Now we're at Bridge 143, somewhere near Cotter. We're coming into Flippin. This is the Flippin Depot, and I want you to notice all the lumber. Look at all the lumber. We're talking fence posts, we're talking railroad ties. That was big business, big business. And you can see all the lumber stacked on either side of the tracks. Again, this is 1935. Now we come into Yellville. This is Yellville's second depot. And the depot actually sat at a place called Summit. You all may know where Summit's at. They could not go down into Yellville, so they put the depot up on top. They called it Yellville, but technically it was Summit. The first depot burned in 1913. This was the second depot, and it's the one you see preserved today in Yellville. Now it's down in Yellville, and I just drove by it today. Now we're coming into the Cricket Tunnel. This is, he just exited the north portal of the Cricket Tunnel here. This is the tunnel that gave the railroad lots of problems over the years. In fact, they had to daylight. And what we mean by daylight is sometimes you can take tunnels and blast them open to the daylight. And you can see where they had to blast some of that open because they kept having avalanches, you know. Train would come around the corner, there's an avalanche, they'd either hit it or people would get injured, or they would have to stop the train. So they did have to daylight, and then they had to line it with concrete. That was another $400,000 expense. Here we are at the Crest Tunnel, milepost 435. Again, he's just sitting on the back of the car, having gone through the tunnel, breathing in all that coal smoke from the locomotives and coming out of the tunnel. Now we're coming into Hollister, Missouri, milepost 445. Then we go into Crane, Missouri, which was also a division point. There was a branch line that went to Springfield, Missouri, out of Crane. They had a coaling. That weird device you see in the middle is a coaling tower where they can bring cars in, dump coal. It has a system to move the coal up into the tower and then by gravity drop it in. These locomotives like these here carry coal for their fuel, and then the big water tank as well. And so being near rivers, especially the White River line, they had an ample supply of water, which was good for the steam locomotives. Now we're coming into Aurora, Missouri on the train. There's the water tower. The Aurora Depot can barely be seen just to the left of the water tower there. We're leaving Aurora now, passing through they had a big Majestic flour mill there, and we're crossing the Frisco Railroad. These tracks that you see right here is the Frisco Railroad that we're crossing in Aurora. They had a railroad tower there in the middle of the picture. That was called the AU Tower. Those are telegraph symbols, AU. And the Majestic flour mill. And so you just got to ride in 1935 on the White River line. Isn't that wonderful?
Cool.
So anyway, I just thought those were neat. But let's talk about some of the risks of the line. First of all, fires. Very remote, lightning, dry conditions. How about a farmer that's mad that the railroad was built through that property? Things would happen. So here's White River Trestle number 105, partially destroyed by fire on April 28, 1910. George Hall lived in Galena, Missouri. He got this picture. And I'm sure that many wood structures burned over the years. We know the Yellville Depot burned. When you have a fire-breathing steam locomotive and you have wooden passenger cars and you have wooden depots and you have wooden platforms, there were lots of fires over the years that I probably couldn't even document. But there were some accidents though, floods and washouts. It's in a very remote region. Sometimes we can get torrential rains, creeks swell. And here's September 9th, 1911, George Hall took his camera out and got a picture of this locomotive going over the trestle. The locomotive's down in the creek bed. The tender of the locomotive is still hanging precipitously on the trestle there. He got another photo from this angle, so you can kind of see the locomotive. That had to have been a jarring ride for the engineer, to just drop off a trestle like that. I don't have any kind of accident report on this, but they hooked it up to a crane and they were pulling it and they pulled the locomotive over. So now it's a submarine instead of a locomotive. But here's you all have heard of the great April 1927 flood. The epic, biggest flood, Mississippi River. I mean, it was horrible. It affected so much of the United States, and it affected Cotter as well. So here's a gentleman with his relatively new, perhaps, car. That's the Cotter Depot behind him, and that just shows you the amount of water that came in. Remember that repair in place? I'll go back if you want to get that shot. Remember that repair in place shed that I showed you at Cotter? There's your water. Water came up several feet into the roundhouse, into Cotter actually. I understand that 40 some odd businesses were destroyed by this flood in Cotter. It was devastating. Up in Branson, here's Branson. The depot is, that's the same depot that's still there today. If you go to Branson to ride the Branson Scenic Railroad, this is the same depot that's still there. It survived, but look at everything around it. It's just amazing. Here's a panoramic shot that a gentleman named Domino Danzero he took a panorama of Branson. So there's the depot. I'll just try to point out a couple things. This is a big coaling dock where they would push cars loaded with coal up on this incline and then be able to drop the coal by gravity to the steam locomotives. But the Branson Landing is where you see kind of an opening there. That's all the Branson Landing now is, where the Branson Landing currently is. But here's the April 1927 flood. Domino Danzero got on top of that big coaling incline that I showed you, that coaling ramp, and took a picture of the depot. This is facing Railroad North, and he got several pictures. Again, the depot, you can see the depot, Branson Depot in the picture here. These guys are just floating around. Here's more, looking up Main Street in Branson. So floods were a problem. That was obviously one of the risks of the White River, was anytime you build along a river, you're gonna have some trouble if there's flooding. So this is Lake Taneycomo Bridge there in Branson, Boswell, Arkansas. You can see lots of people took pictures because this was a very epic flood. They even would take the locomotive and sometimes loaded cars out on the trestle to try to stabilize the trestle, to try to save it, so the floodwaters didn't take it down. Fortunately at Cotter that didn't happen. That 1905 swing span bridge is still there at Cotter. It's interesting, if you look at the pictures, and I think I've got a picture coming up that I'll point this out, the river has shifted since the bridge was built, so the swing span really isn't over the main channel now. But another fact that I read, and I don't have this proven, but they built that bridge in 1904, and it's a swing span to allow riverboat traffic that used to go up and down the White River to pass. But from what I have read, they only swung the span one time in its whole history.
That's right.
So it's probably rusted shut now, I would think. Cotter, this is colorized by a gentleman, some of you may know Vincent Anderson, colorized this, but this shows the flood in Cotter, and it shows the roundhouse inundated by water. Here's another photo from the other direction. This is looking down 4th Street in Cotter. So when the railroad floods like this is the 1927 flood. So it's all steam locomotives. Diesels haven't really come about yet on the line. So how did the trains go? Well, steam locomotives can do this. Now your newer diesel locomotives cannot do this because they have what are called electric traction motors down by the wheels, and they have a big diesel power plant. That's why they call it a diesel electric locomotive. The diesel power plant runs a generator that supplies power to the traction motors. You can't get in deep water with those, or they'll just short out. But the steam locomotives didn't have that problem, so they could actually swim through the water, such as this freight train here. Calico Rock. This is 1935, so there were several floods over the years. Calico Rock Depot is sitting in water. In 1945, another massive flood, and in Branson, this did more damage in April 1945 than the April 1927 flood did. And this is in Branson. You can see the twisted trestle. This is the Taneycomo trestle. And here's a passenger train. How would you like to be aboard a passenger train? And you're going through, I don't know how many feet of water there, but they could do it. And if you look on the very front of the locomotive, there's actually some gentleman riding, the pilot of the locomotive, looking out for any kind of obstacles. You know, y'all seen the movie Polar Express, maybe? Yeah, trains can't do what they do in Polar Express. That's totally fiction. The guy riding on the front of the locomotive with the big beard, you know? No, but in this case, he's riding on the pilot, just looking out. There's a April 1945 picture of the part of that trestle over Taneycomo actually did wash out, but it was rebuilt. Another risk is human error, and this is true with all railroading, and it's very scary for railroaders. We have an engineer here that worked on the line. I feel for engineers. Growing up all my life, I wanted to be a locomotive engineer, but then when I became adult and I found out what locomotive engineers go through, I'm thinking, well, I'll just actually I pastor a church right now. I'll just do that. It's kind of scary to pastor a church too, but what happens is there's a lot of times if a rule isn't followed or somebody wrongly interpreted a rule. Let me tell you what happened here. This was Saturday, July 13th, 1940 in Mount Olive. And this locomotive 1278 on your left with train 261 and locomotive 6420 with train 232 collided head on. Two were killed, the engineer of train 261 on the left and one passenger, plus 15 others were injured on the passenger train. And the cause of the accident was failure to obey a meet order. So they would get train orders and they would read the train order. The engineer would have a train order, the conductor would have a train order, they would read the train orders. And for some reason they either didn't understand or whatever, and accidents happen. How about this one? This is February 1st, 1962, south of Cotter. The train comes around a corner and right in front of them, trains can't stop on a dime. You know that. Trains take sometimes a half mile, depending on the speed, the grade, and the tonnage that they have. It takes a long time to stop a train. And they come around a corner and there's a 30-ton boulder that has fallen off the ridge on the tracks. And there was nothing they could do. And they hit it and it knocked the engines. And you can see one of the engines is almost completely submerged in the White River. This is a sad one here. Norfolk had some really bad things happen, and really almost in a 2-year span. The first is this accident that caused there was some vandalism done to the tracks, and this red ball freight came around the curve there at Norfolk, I should say, Norfolk, and came around the corner and hit something and derailed. The lead engine ran into some lumber that was in a siding there, and this is what it looked like. And the story is told that the engineer and the fireman, who were seated on either side, watched as that beam came through the nose of the locomotive and right in between them. They both were uninjured. Amazing, amazing. But I want you to notice also, see the Norfolk Depot? Just missed that Norfolk Depot. Beautiful wood depot. Just missed it. So there's the pile up. All the cars started piling up. The engine started piling up. The depot was spared. You can see they brought in a big crane. These are newspaper accounts. It says prior to the accident, a crewman had left a seat demolished by the timber in the engine cab. He had just stood up when that timber came through. Wow. The crane removes wreckage from the track area. No interruption in rail traffic occurred from the mishap. So they would send out these, what they called the big boom, the wrecker crew, and they would, as quick as they could, get the track back in service so they could continue train service. But then, less than 2 years later, this is horrible, in Norfolk, and we're talking about risk, okay? Disaster strikes the Norfolk area again less than 2 years later. This is a November 2nd, 1967 account of October 29, 1967 accident that occurred from vandalism. And look at that. Officers say child, 7 years old, caused the train wreck. Well, let me give you the story. This is the locomotive. The whole cab is just crushed in. Let me tell you the story. Thursday, this accident happened on October 29th. Here's a quote from the paper. Officers say child, age 7, caused train wreck. Sheriff Emmett Edmonds and prosecuting attorney Robert Dudley said Tuesday that a 7-year-old Norfolk boy caused the freight train wreck that killed one crewman and injured another at Norfolk Sunday evening. The boy used a rock to break a padlock on the siding switch, while another 7-year-old boy stood by, then pulled a lever which caused the derailment of Missouri Pacific train number 201. A Missouri Pacific representative said the 58-car freight train pulled by 4 engines, led by locomotive 572, was cruising through Norfolk at 42 miles an hour
when it suddenly turned off the main line into a siding, slamming into other railroad cars that were parked on the siding. The accident happened about 5:15 p.m. Railroad cars piled into the old Norfolk Depot beside Highway 5, shearing the depot in two. Poor depot. That depot didn't have a chance. Twisting it on its foundation. And so they talk about the previous derailment, but here's a picture showing the cars, and that's the roof of the depot that you see there. The cars just cut the depot in half. One other accident, this is more recent years, May 14th, 1997 in Branson. Branson Scenic Railroad had just started a few years earlier, actually in 93, I guess. And a man by the name of Frederick Garrett managed to get this photo. And one evening, the local, I don't know if it's a Cotter local, was coming into town, and as the story goes, now this is the National Transportation Safety Board investigation report, and they put it this way. The manager of the Branson Scenic Train had gotten into an argument with the general manager of the railroad, and he forgot to line the switch back up after the Branson Scenic Train had gone in the switch at Branson. The Cotter local comes around, this is the Cotter local, comes around and smashes into the front of that old passenger engine, punches its nose in, basically, just punched it in the nose. This engine, I have some pictures, but they're not great, but this engine actually hit that locomotive head on and went up into it, and they ended up like this. And fortunately, as I understand, the crew saw it about to happen and jumped off the locomotive. And I do understand they received some injuries, but nobody was killed. But the locomotive sure was ruined. So take a look at this locomotive. It was a beautiful, what we call an F unit, and believe it or not, they rebuilt it. And I took this picture, and I didn't realize it until I did this presentation. I took this picture on the exact day, 24 years later, that it got punched in the nose. So anyway, this is the Branson Scenic engine that you'll see. So they did fix it. Let me do it before and after. There's before and there's after. So plastic surgery is just wonderful. So this is kind of neat. During World War II, in August 1943, the Cotter, Arkansas High School Band was honored and equipped as the Missouri Pacific Booster Club Band. Isn't that cool? And that's at the old Cotter Gym, which still stands, I believe. Talking about rewards, how about this? Cotter, Arkansas, July 2nd, 1952. President Harry Truman shaking hands with Russell J. Lahman, mayor of Gassville, as he boards a train at Cotter on the way to the dedication of the Bull Shoals and Norfolk Dams. Other dignitaries in this picture include Judge R.M. Ruthven, Mountain Home Attorney Jug Tenon, and Congressman James Trimble. Here's another picture, same train with Harry Truman. This is in Batesville. And so he came to dedicate those two dams. Of course, they were built because of all the flooding problems in the White River valleys between 1915 and 1927. That's what persuaded Congress to initiate the Flood Control Act of 1938 and later the Flood Control Act of 1941. And those two acts helped create Bull Shoals Dam and Norfolk Lakes. And the Bull Shoals Dam was originally constructed for flood risk reduction and power generation. As I said earlier, there was a named train that went up and down the line for a time. From 1931 till 1952, it was called the Southern Scenic. Of course, they had the passenger train carried express. Before there was FedEx and UPS, there was the Railway Express Agency. They carried express. They carried the U.S. mail, so all these communities around here got their mail from the train. The train even had aboard it a railway post office, which we'll see in just a moment. Here's a picture of the Southern Scenic in Branson in 1947. There's the back of the train. I know it's real hard to see, but that drumhead says Southern Scenic. This is at Branson in 1944. Y'all remember when trains used to have cabooses? I used to love to watch a train because, I'd wave at the engineer and the head-end crew and watch the train go by, and there was always somebody to wave at the back. But not anymore. They've kind of automated that. And most of your cabooses now are on static display in parks and whatnot. But this is 1944 in Branson. This is in Hollister in 1946, and this is the car right behind the locomotive is what's called the railway post office car. And if you look down in the lower left corner of my photo here, that's a cancellation from a letter that was mailed aboard the train. And it says Newport and Carthage. And then underneath it says RPO, that's Railway Post Office. And that's dated May 26, 1939. So that was real important. The trains brought the mail, they brought the express. And then they later dieselized. About 1949, you started seeing your first diesels on the White River Line. By 1951, it was all diesel on the White River Line. This is a diesel locomotive pulling the Southern Scenic into Branson at 1950. Oh, let me go back here. Well, by the late 50s, now the roads are starting to get improved and people have cars. And so who wants to ride a train? I can take the car. We got good highways, right? So you can see now the train is only down to 2 cars. This is coming out of the Cricket Tunnel, the north portal of the Cricket Tunnel, the southern, well, what used to be called the Southern Scenic. By this time, it's an unnamed train. It's just called Train 231 and 232. But fortunately, a gentleman named Harold Henry got a color photo at Cotter, Arkansas on October 25th, 1959 of the train leaving Cotter, and then he hopped off the train at Flippin and got this picture, October 25th, 1959. You can see what the train looked like. And then we have these pictures from 1958 in color at Yellville, and here's one of the trains coming in to Yellville on May 31st, 1958, and another train going the other direction at Yellville, May 31st, 1958. So you can see there was a decline. They were still hauling the mail, they were still hauling express, but there weren't many passengers and they were losing money. So the last train came about March 20th, 1960. There was a reporter for the Springfield News Leader named Lucille Morris Upton, and she had a photographer with her named Betty Love, and Betty Love took these pictures of the final passenger train on the White River Line. A friend of mine colorized this photo, but that's just Bear Creek north of Bergman. Here coming through the Cricket Tunnel in the snow. It's March, it's cold, and there's snow on the ground at this time. Here they are at Aurora. These are some probably railroad officials that are unnamed. Here they are with the crew. The engineer was Holland Crawford, was the engineer that day for that last train. And you know, there's a lot of maintenance that was required because they had steam heat. They ran steam line through the cars to run the heater, and so there's a crewman checking underneath the car. There's a flagman when they would stop. They had rules where they had to get out and flag, making sure there's no approaching train that's going to come up on them. Here's Holland Crawford in the cab of the locomotive. Engineers don't normally dress like this, but that was his last day running the train. It was a historic day. There they are at Branson, the very last day. This is March 20th, 1960. There they are leaving Branson. This is in the baggage car, one of the employees, so you can kind of see what inside the car looks like. Here's some mail and express guys handling a pouch of mail and some express packages. Here's what you and I would be doing, just sitting in the car, enjoying the ride. People sure dress nice to ride on the passenger trains back in those days. And this is a crew, what they call deadheading, meaning the crew has probably done their run and they're going back to their home base. And so there's a crew deadheading on the train. That was the last train. All right, just a few more slides and I'll be done. Here we go. Pyatt. Do they call it Pyatt or Pyatt?
Pyatt.
Pyatt. Okay, I'll get it right.
P-Y-A-T-T.
Okay.
That's what it says.
Okay, I love it. I love it. Isn't that a beautiful photo? My friend Ken Albrecht, he would climb these bluffs and get these beautiful scenic pictures of the trains going by. Here's Calico Rock with the train. This is back when it was Missouri Pacific. The locomotives were blue. And you can see there's a Guyan. In the background, you can see the silica sand plant in Guyan, which is a major shipper on the railroad. Here's Cotter in 1987, the Cotter Yard. It's not near as big and busy even then as it once was back in the heyday. But let me give you a little history here. The Union Pacific merged the Missouri Pacific and Western Pacific into their railroad, the Union Pacific, on December 22nd, 1982. And the White River Division became part of the Union Pacific's Northern Division initially. And through service from Kansas City to Memphis on the MOPAC, that's what we call the Missouri Pacific, the MOPAC, ceased on April 4th, 1990. Through service from Kansas City to Memphis ceased April 4th, 1990. So now all of a sudden you're starting to see these yellow engines show up. This is the Union Pacific yellow and gray locomotives. Here's a cotter going across that swing span. Remember, I told you how the river lanes had shifted a little bit since it was built, and that swing span only swung once, from what I understand. Here's the Union Pacific locomotive leading a train out of Cotter heading east. Here is a eastbound freight led by a Union Pacific locomotive at Branson. And just to give you just a little history as I close, on December 22nd, 1982, the Union Pacific acquired the Missouri Pacific. 10 years later, December 13th, 1992, a company called Railtex formed a new railroad called the Missouri and Northern Arkansas, which is still what it's called today. On February 4th, 2000, Rail America acquired Railtex, so it's one conglomeration acquiring another one. And then on December 28th, 2012, a company called Genesee and Wyoming, they're a large railroad, short line and regional conglomerate, acquired Rail America, including the Missouri and Northern Arkansas. So that's their logo today. As I close, I just want to invite, if you use Facebook, if you would like to learn more about railroad history in Arkansas, I created an Arkansas Railroad History page. We have 3,600 members, and we thousands and thousands of photos and stories. You railroaders, I'd love for you to post stories. It's so fun just learning about what it was like, for us that did not work on the railroad. But it's free. You can join it. I have another one called Kansas City Southern Railway History, or KCS Railway History. I'm president of the Arkansas Boston Mountain chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. Here's our website. It is arkrailfan.com. We have a monthly newsletter called the Arkansas Scrambler, which is free. If you want to get on there, you can look at our past issues and our current issues. But we also are, a lot of our original members have gotten old and passed on, and we are now transitioning into a new era where we're starting to meet virtually via Zoom. So we have people all over the United States in our meetings. So I do want to let you know that you're always welcome to join us. We typically meet every third Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. And the caboose meant that's the end, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I'd be interested to hear. Yes, ma'am.
This is kind of a local question.
Sure.
My daughter lives up in Carthage, Missouri.
Carthage.
And I heard one time